Being a caregiver does not come naturally to everybody. And as society is seeking to keep its disabled and frail elderly in the community, we have got to support our caregivers emotionally and physically and spiritually in order that we don't put the people for whom they care in vulnerable situations. Hi, this is Sue, and I would like to speak on her behalf. Sue was a head nurse for most of her professional life, and as such, always believed in being a role model and a teacher, and so hasn't changed. We're hoping that through our film, we're going to be able to inspire people to be as independent and as loving of life as Sue is. We'd like to inspire caregivers to be the best they can be, and to help those who support caregivers to understand some of the complexities of the role that they have taken on. Sue has multiple sclerosis, the chronic progressive type we soon found out. She lost mobility and vision quickly, and soon we found ourselves in a world of grab bars and bath seats and commodes. We were always one step behind. No sooner had Sue accepted her first regular wheelchair than she was having to be assessed for a reclining model. Sue stopped climbing stairs before we were able to get the porch lift in place. We got our in-home lifting system only after injuries to those attempting transfers. Changes were taking place so fast. It was a time of great adjustment for the pair of us, a time of many feelings of inadequacy from me and frustration from Sue, and fear by both of us, because we did not know what would happen next. Sue got aspiration pneumonia before we fully understood the nature of her swallowing problems. If she drank liquids such as water, it went down the windpipe and she choked. So all liquids had to be thickened, and Sue's food had to be pureed, and soon she had to be fed. Although we had started out with homemakers and respite care workers, soon Sue needed healthcare aides to look after her while I was out at work, and Sue started going to an adult day program. I found I needed 1 night a week of unbroken sleep to keep going, and so a healthcare aide was hired for a 12-hour night shift. Having regular familiar workers gave Sue a sense of security and enabled me to relax on my night out. But the return home next morning to a warm welcome is something I always treasure. A registered nurse makes weekly visits to do bathing and monitors skin and vital signs. Our occupational therapist was responsible for assessing the equipment we needed, teaching me appropriate positioning for Sue's body as it lost power, and how to react to muscle spasms. We were always experimenting and troubleshooting, but it gave me the confidence to believe that problems could be solved. When Sue started choking on her saliva, we experimented with medications to dry it up, but there were side effects. So eventually we decided to just let it drip out. So we go through many bibs in a day, and on special occasions, Sue wears ones that were designed by her sister. As swallowing got worse, so Sue's voice faded and finally ceased. A year later, a gastric tube was needed. Imagine never tasting food in your mouth. When it's such a pleasurable part of life, we couldn't deprive Sue of it, and she accepted the risks. Food is still pureed and placed in ice cube trays. Each day, Sue decides what she wants to taste. She doesn't have to swallow it. It's the taste that counts. Traveling by this time was either done by transit for the disabled or by using a transfer board, and I pulled on a canvas sling to bring Sue's body towards me. It was during the 3rd summer following diagnosis that Sue agreed to have an indwelling catheter. Once she was fully hydrated, she could not be out for long before needing to be changed. Deciding on a permanent catheter has to be viewed in terms of its advantages. Our increased freedom and maintaining better quality of skin, rather than focusing on the apparent loss of dignity and increased risk of infection. After seeing the movie A League of Their Own, we too do our Tom Hanks routine daily. Sue's urine bag is discreetly contained in a fabric bag, and our neighbors gave us an assortment of belts from ladies' summer dresses to have color-coordinated covers for the tubing. In that 3rd summer, after diagnosis, we had some breathing room for the first time. There was time for fun, to do pleasurable things. Time at last to assess where life had taken us and to start the emotional healing needed to adjust to such an altered lifestyle. Anger and depression are usually part of adjusting to disability. Bitterness and hopelessness when confronting the lost future. There is an expectation that every mother will be able to look after the disabled child, every child the sick parent, and every spouse or friend their loved one. But this is not realistic. Some people cannot cope with sickness, deformity, unpredictability, crises. Many people, however much they love and care for someone, just would not be able to empty a catheter bag, cope with choking or coughing, or clean the site of a gastric tube. Some find that the bitterness in missing out on their own life goals or the act of juggling too many responsibilities affects their ability to be a caregiver. Many have had to put the needs of others first, and finally in retirement they can satisfy their own needs at last. But then the spouse has a heart attack, is diagnosed with cancer or Alzheimer's disease, and again their needs have to be put back on the shelf. When disease or injury hits those in the prime of life, the caregiver may have planned these years to fulfill some dreams. Therefore, they must first grieve the loss before they can become effective caregivers. To be able to care, one must first view the quality of the past relationship. Has the caring already been drained? Those whose only motivation is duty or obligation, or are in a situation with no choices, will soon become stressed out caregivers. Then there is the problem of the disabled person's behavior and personality changing with disease or injury. And the wife says, "This isn't the man I married." The son says, "This isn't the mother I once knew and loved." These family members need so much support from others to guide them through their grief and help them learn to cope with their new role, their new relationship. Some people, while adjusting to their disability, take out their anger on the person closest to them. The carer may be just as angry and depressed, but often believe they don't have the right to the feelings. After all, they aren't the disabled one. But carers must understand that their feelings are just as valid and painful as those experienced by the disabled person. Carers do need emotional support, Some hesitate to ask, believing that it would be a sign of weakness. Some are burdened with the belief that disease is a punishment. I suppose for some, this helps them be resigned to their fate, but for most it adds to the anguish of their lives and slows down their search for serenity. Lung cancer, AIDS, cirrhosis of the liver, from whatever cause, all have stigmas associated with them. Carers don't need extra burdens, perceived or real. Caregivers have to be empowered, not oppressed by others. Feeling in control prevents the feeling of victimization. Caregivers need sounding boards, an ear to hear their fears and frustrations. They don't always need advice and solutions. They need the opportunity to find the answers within themselves. Another factor influencing the amount of support that one might receive is the perceived weight of the responsibility. People make remarks to each other like, "I don't know why you're so stressed out. Joan's looking after her father wonderfully well, and he's twice the load that your husband is." There is the assumption that we all come to this task with equal skills, motivation, and caring ability. But some cannot relate to the sick, especially if that person no longer resembles the one they were originally committed to. What is an unbearable load for one is not to another. What makes the caregiving role finally impossible varies from person to person. For some, it may be sleepless nights. For others, it might be urinary incontinence. Now, for some, those occurrences are not difficult to deal with, but the real crisis comes when there is loss of communication. I was lucky. Certainly, it was strange in my mid-40s to learn how to change diapers, but at the time I was established in my career and self-employed, giving me flexibility of work hours. I had already done many exciting things in my life. I'd traveled the world. Probably it was a time in my life when I would have been a homebody, enjoying my garden and taking time out to be creative. And so when Sue got sick and needed me, it was okay. It might not have been so okay if I had planned that these were the years to travel, or advance my career, or go back to school. Then my feelings would have been very different. I might have felt deprived, and my unmet goals might have haunted me. Some people are innately more successful at facing the challenges of giving care because they've already learned how to face crises, feel empowered when problem-solving, and can live with the unpredictable. But that's not to say that those with no previous experience cannot learn. And caring often unlocks a side of self that perhaps would have lain hidden or dormant all one's life. But it can't be done alone. We need help from others. We have to be selective and ask only of others what they're capable of giving. Some will be specific in the help that they're willing to offer. Others leave it up to you. Many will wait to be asked and will not offer. We have developed a network of people who are there for us when we need them. They are family and friends, neighbors and volunteers. Some come on a regular basis, others when asked. Some people would be unable to help with personal care, but bring us some specialty food items every now and again. Some are willing to learn new skills. Others help with the chores, which saves my energy for other things. But it is important to use this respite time well. Caregivers must retain their social contacts, intellectual stimulus, and have time to relax. Friends help by accompanying us on outings and share with the wheelchair pushing. There's a loneliness in caregiving, especially at 4 o'clock in the morning in those quiet, dark hours before the dawn. And that's when I know how alone I really am. It's just me and the reality of my responsibilities. No professional at the other end of a telephone. In the early days, when I was up 3-4 times a night, I was drained by the fear that I would be too tired in the morning to be able to fulfill my other responsibilities. I'd position Sue in bed and turn out the light, and within a few minutes she had me up again, changing her position, and I knew I could feel myself losing control. And I'd be saying, "Why'd you tell me you're comfortable when you're not?" And I'd be yelling it. And I'd say, "I think you're doing this to me on purpose. I think you're trying to prove to me how inadequate I am." And defenseless eyes would look at me, and I hated myself. Next morning, she'd wake up and smile, and I'd ask, "Did you sleep well?" And since she felt rested, she'd nod, having no memory for what had been said in the heat of the night. But I remembered, and was left alone with my guilt and the frightening awareness that it could have taken so little to have crossed over the line and become abusive. I think every caregiver has felt the fear of the closeness of that line. I'm near it a lot less often these days. Probably because of experience, because of support, and because of confidence. Caregiving is usually thrust upon you without warning, or insidiously creeps up on you. But most of us learn on the job. We draw on past skills and the wisdom of others to survive. One certainly doesn't start out as a graduate. There is always learning to be done. When choking became a problem, so did lung congestion. Postural drainage techniques using clapping help to bring up the sputum. The suction pump is always by the bed, and it helps to drain saliva and sputum from Sue's mouth. We have a vibrating cushion with rechargeable batteries, and it keeps the congestion moving upwards so it can be expelled. And so spring has returned, and we've survived another winter. Sue had 4 chest infections and 1 stay in hospital during the winter. Is somewhat weaker. Was that a yawn? And is a little more spastic. But we survived. And the winter wasn't all bad, because during it, Sue celebrated her 50th birthday in great style. Our great achievement this spring was to go on holiday by ourselves, requiring the help of no one. Now, we'd done a lot of planning, and we made sure that the resort that we went to had in the suite a bed Chesterfield that was accessible. Most resorts and hotels have beds which are flush to the floor, and you can't get a lifting system under them. Bed Chesterfields, however, fold out on legs and are therefore able to be used when you need something like the traveling Hoyer, which is what we rented, and it made us independent. We also picked a suite that had a kitchenette, had a microwave, so that I could continue to heat up Sue's food so that she could daily have food by mouth. I didn't take our usual frozen pureed food, but used baby food instead, and chocolate puddings and vanilla puddings and so on. When I elevated the rented lifting system, I could use it to put the gravity bag on for Sue's feeding. We also took with us the suction pump and extra pillows and plastic garbage bags to put under the bed sheets. The resort also had an indoor swimming pool that was accessible, so Sue could be in the pool area and I could keep an eye on her while I was able to have a swim. And of course we also took with us the radio so that we could keep abreast of what was happening to the Blue Jays while we were out of town. We knew that we couldn't do without our professional support system for long, but for 10 glorious days, we really felt as if we didn't need them. During the winter, it had become impossible to transfer Sue out of the car using the transfer board. So in the spring, our new toy, which ran off the battery of the car, gave us back our freedom. In that fourth spring, it was time for registered nursing assistants to replace our healthcare aides. They were qualified to undertake so many more of the procedures required in Sue's care. I learned therapeutic touch, hoping it would be of some help, and continued problem solving. The monopod that I used to use for my camera is now used at feeding time when we're away from home and don't have our IV pole or something to hang the gravity bag from. Others eat in public, so why should we feel conspicuous? As time goes by, we feel more comfortable being out there, being ourselves. When we display this confidence, strangers are far more likely to ask if they can help. There is a place for Sue in the real world. Sometimes I have difficulty admitting I need help to run my home, do my job, and look after Sue. Sometimes it's hard to incorporate the help into our lives. Sometimes I reject it. Sometimes I fear rejection, so I don't ask. Sometimes I hate being reminded I need it. Sometimes I resent being told what I need. Sometimes I'm tired of having to feel grateful. Sometimes the intrusion into our privacy is intolerable. Sometimes it's intolerable not having it. But none of this access and freedom would be possible if it were not for government health funding, insurance, disability pensions, and savings. With Sue unable to speak, how can communication be maintained? We phrase questions so that they have yes or no answers. Today we've got veal stew, beef curry, or chicken with rice. Okay? So, veal stew? No. Curry? Chicken with rice. Chicken with rice. Okay, that sounds good. Okay, the second selection is broccoli or carrots. What's it to be? Broccoli? Yep, broccoli. Okay, let's run through that again. It's to be chicken with rice and broccoli. Is that okay with you? Yep. Sue's communication is only limited by our imagination. It is up to us to think what it might be that Sue is wanting to tell us. Ask her and wait for the response. Sue has become a listener and is involved by being included. Sue enjoys touching and being touched. Perhaps this is the best way to stay connected with the rest of the world. Sue is still a people person, always wants to be out there, a part of the world. Some people may only see in her what she has lost, but we concentrate on what she still has to give. We are regular churchgoers, and Sue hands out the order of service. On some occasions, she's stronger than others, but she always gives everything she's got. Our relationships with God has provided us with spiritual strength and emotional support. We are finding our serenity. Our church has provided us with many of the people who share and help us in our lives. I'm not saying you have to be religious to be able to care and cope, because for some people religious dogma has made being sick or disabled more difficult to bear. But I think that developing some form of faith, belief system, or spiritual self can help, can strengthen in a time of need. And so now it is the 4th autumn of Sue's changed lifestyle. She's a little more spastic these days, but it just means that we put larger clothes on Sue for easier access, and there's more coughing and spluttering and more infection. But there's no less joy in living, and we take advantage of every opportunity. And so that's our story. We don't know what tomorrow will bring, and we try not to worry about it. Today is what we have, and we cherish it. We have our team of professionals behind us, our volunteers and friends and family network developed to support us. Our faith and hope nourishes our spiritual selves. I don't always have my emotions under control, especially in the small dark hours before the dawn. But I have learnt that if I'm to constantly, effectively care for another human being, then I've got to be able to take time out for myself. But I've been lucky because this responsibility has come at a time in my life when I have been able to learn how to handle it. And one is constantly learning and discovering how to care. But you know, perhaps that is the purpose of life.